friends, and welcome to the School Librarian Learning Network podcast. I'm Steve Tatro, also known as Dr. T Loves Books, and I love talking about all things related to school libraries. I may be an old dog, but I'm always trying to learn new tricks. In each episode of the SLLN podcast, I'll chat with a school librarian about a lesson they love. Hopefully, this can be a place for school librarians to get ideas and find new ways to engage with their students and staff. As a good friend likes to say, we're better together. So I hope this podcast will help school librarians connect with and learn from each other. The opinions and ideas shared in this podcast by myself and my guests are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. And because school librarians always strive to be good digital citizens, I cite sources when using material that is not my own. Without further ado, let's get to this week's episode. Hey everybody, we're back and I am so excited. I've got a new friend from Texas and I am really excited about this lesson that she's sharing. So Kaitlyn, thank you so much for being here. I truly appreciate it. And why don't you take a second and just tell folks a little about who you are and where you're at.
Hi, I'm Kaitlyn Carpenter, also known as Carpe Librarian, or to my kids, they call me Carp. And I'm like, guys, that's a fish. I like Carpe better. And I am in Houston, Texas. This is my 5th year as a librarian in Houston. So it's been a really great journey. And I was so excited to see you and meet you at TLA this year.
It was fun. I mean, TLA, this was my second one, and both of them were just so amazing. And I got to meet so many awesome people. It's such a great experience, especially when you get to meet people from other places. So I really appreciate Texas having me down.
I wanted to ask how you ended up in the Texas Library Association conference since you're not from Texas.
Yeah, it was actually kind of funny. So I don't know if you know Wendy Prey from so she's school librarian in Texas, and we had met online on Twitter back when it was still Twitter, and we just kind of struck up a little bit of a friendship. And at some point, we did a couple of like a webinar or two together, and she was saying how like, oh, TLA is coming up, you should apply to see if they'll do one of your presentations because you've got this thing that was cool and that thing was cool. I was like, all right, why not? Can't hurt. And so I put in, and they accepted a couple of my ideas for presentations last year, and I was like, "Great, I'm going to Texas." So I couldn't say no, and people were going to be kind enough to invite me. So, and then this year, pretty much the same thing. But I had such a good time last year. I was like, "Well, I definitely want to try and go back again this year." So it did not disappoint. Just so great, and I love how it kind of moves around the state too. So I've never been to Texas until last year, so now I've gotten to see 2 different places in Texas and meet some wonderful new friends.
Yeah, it's so much fun. I was one of the librarians I started in the dreaded COVID year. So I started in 2019, and TLA was supposed to be in Houston, where I work, in 2020. And then I think 2 weeks before the conference was when everything began to shut down.
Oh.
So I've been a librarian for 5 years in Texas, but I've only been able to attend 3 TLAs in person. But every time it's been absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I mean, just the sheer scope of it is so amazing and impressive. I think somebody was saying it's usually first or second largest library conference in the US, if not the world, which I can believe, having seen just the sheer number of people that go to it. Just amazing. Absolutely amazing. I'm kind of curious. So you said that you started in 2019 as the school librarian. What was your path into librarianship? How did you end up in the library?
I kind of fell into it, and I've talked to a lot of librarians that was kind of the case. I always knew I wanted to be a teacher. And from like when I was 9, I had one of those, amazing teachers that like will always be in your heart forever. And I was like, I want to be her for somebody. Not teaching 3rd grade because the littles scare me.
I'm with you.
I went to school and I became an English teacher right out of college. And around my 2nd year teaching, I was feeling a little bit of burnout, and the school librarian and I had kind of gotten a little bit closer, and she was like, "You would be so good at this." And I was like, um, and I'll say I was very skeptical at first because I did not have great experiences with libraries when I grew up. I'm originally from Louisiana, and like there was a lot of censorship in the 90s when I grew up. Harry Potter was banned from my elementary school. And I wouldn't say that my middle school or my high school librarians were anything to write home about. I remember getting in trouble a lot for talking about books in the library, which I thought was just ridiculous. So when I finally sat down and I thought about it, and I was like, what do I truly love about my job? And it was talking to kids about books. I could do, and I loved teaching, but I was like, I could do without the grading. I could do without all of the essays. I could do without all of the other things, but I was like, the few times that I had had those very intense conversations with kids, I had one that he came up to me after Thanksgiving break, and he had been in ISS that day because he did not do, I worked at a very crazy school that sent home packets during every break. And if you did not complete them, you got in trouble when you came back.
Wow.
I do not endorse that. But he did not do whatever the assignment was for my class. So he ended up in ISS because he didn't show up to make it up. And he was one of my favorite kids. I know we're not supposed to have those, but like he had a little place in my heart. And I was like, he's going to make me like upset that he's going to come complain about the fact that he had to go to ISS because of my class. And he had been reading Winger by Andrew Smith, which I absolutely adore and love. It's one of those books that makes you laugh and definitely makes you cry. It's got one of those like heart punches towards the end. And he came up to me and he was like, "Miss, you made me cry in ISS yesterday." And I was like, you know what, dude, I'm going to ignore that at this moment because you're just trying to make me feel bad. And then he comes and he hands me the book. And I was like, oh, he'd been reading it for like 3 months from my personal library in my classroom. And I was like, oh, did you finish it? Or did you finally decide it wasn't for you? And he was like, "Miss, that's why I cried." He was like, "I was in ISS with all these bad kids that were like actually doing bad things to deserve to be there. And all I had to do was finish this little packet that I should have just done and then read my book. And then it got to that part and I was sitting there crying, trying not to look like a wimp." And I was like, "I'm so sorry. I would have warned you if I knew that's where you were going to be reading the book." And he was like, "Do you have another one just like it?" And I was like, "Yes, I do."
Nice.
And that was kind of like, that's the core memory I have associated with deciding to become a librarian, was like that I think was happened right around the time I was making the decision or thinking about it. And I was like, no, this is what I want to do every single day if I can, is to be able to have like these cool conversations with kids about the stuff that they love and I also love. So,
yeah, I agree. Like, to my mind, the school library is what school should be. Like, kids finding the things that they're interested in and pursuing them, and us just helping them in whatever way we can find the things that they're going to love. But that's a whole other, we could do a couple of hours on how we're going to fix the school system.
Education system.
For now, though, we're going to bring it around to this lesson that you shared, because when you were telling me about this, when you shared like the overview of this, I was like, whoa, this is such a brilliant idea. So I'm so excited that you're going to share this with us. So we're talking about Sociology yearbook. Have I got that right? I think I scripted
we are using our school yearbooks to talk about sociology and culture concepts.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So let's just pretend for a second that I'm a student And I assume that I'm coming to the library for this, or is this going to be happening in the sociology class?
We had the sociology classes come down. We have a dedicated makerspace in our area. So I was able to set out, we have a very long history at my school. So it does help that you have that, but it can still be done if you have a shorter history. But we have yearbooks all the way back to the 50s.
Wow.
So we set up tables with normally about 1 to 2 decades per table. And then we had 5 different yearbooks from that decade. So no kid looked at the same yearbook. And then it was kind of like a somewhat collaborative group project. It was more about having conversations and comparing what they noticed than it was like, you're doing this part and you're doing this part, and like jigsawing it out. Which I really liked because it allowed them to have like, did you see this in this yearbook? I mean, the first day probably took twice as long as it needed to, just because the kids were so hyped to look at all of the yearbooks.
Oh, I bet. And I mean, anytime kids can get their hands on an older yearbook and look up their teachers and be like, oh my gosh, look, Dr. T used to have more hair on the back of his head. Like, there's always, but that I can imagine the engagement that they're having as they're going through these different yearbooks. So they're coming in, they're seeing the yearbooks, they're sitting down. Do you sort of like give them a series of group instructions to sort of kick things off? Like, here's where we're starting, here's where we're going, or is it more of an exploration on their part?
A little bit of both. I am always like, if I want to have a student do something, I want to kind of prove the concept, I will do it with them first.
I think that's great.
I'm going to provide them with something that spells it all out, because, question marks are not great when you're trying. Like, I want to be very explicit about what we're doing. So we set them up with their groups. I think they had picked their groups before they came down with their teacher. And when they came in, they each got, accidentally forgot to bring the sheet with me, but there is a copy of it in the folder I shared with you. But it was a bright green colored cardstock that we put on, and it had the entire format of, here is the project that we are doing with all of our kind of goals. And then it also had examples of how they were going to be filling out the graphic organizer that we adapted. So I'll go back a little bit. And this initially came from a brand new teacher who teaches sociology at my school, came to me looking for yearbooks. And I was like, I don't have them in the library because my library was redone and made a lot smaller. So we have them housed somewhere else. But I was like, I can get them for you and I can facilitate this. And they gave me a general sense. And then I just kind of helped with facilitation and had initially done like an archive lesson with them. So we talked about how to treat the yearbooks with respect, and, you're not allowed to have any food or drinks on the tables. You're only allowed to have pencils when you're writing on other things. Don't write on top of the yearbooks. Those are the only ways that we get to keep them in the pristine condition that they're in, which was really cool. And that's what she initially asked. And that's what we did kind of the first semester, because this is a semester-long course. We got a chance to do it again this last semester. And that's where I feel like we really made it significantly better. So initially she just wanted them to look at, some demographics, clubs, sports, activities, academics. And she had just kind of like listed them, and they were supposed to take notes. And what I kind of observed from the kids was that they were like, how am I supposed to observe activities? How am I supposed to observe sports? So they weren't kind of getting that. And so as we were walking around and helping them, I had started being like, well, if we're talking about demographics, said, how about you just pick a page? Let's look at the whole class on that page, count up how many there are, split them up by, we're we're going to judge people by the way that they look right now. We
Mm-hmm.
don't do that on a normal basis, but we're going to go with the information that we have, and let's split them up and make an observation based off of the information we have there. And so let's count them all up, see how many people are Caucasian, how many people are African American, and split it up and be able to make a educated guess and observation based off of those facts.
Okay.
And so that's kind of what we were going towards at the very end of the first time we did it. So when she came back to me in the spring semester, I was like, I have all of this time. So how about I'm going to just throw something out there and you let me know what you think. And we made it kind of a statistical data and anecdotal observations. So for everything that they were looking for, they looked for a number first, and then they made an observation. And so on the green sheet that I mentioned, it has kind of the overall instructions, and then it also has an example for each of those. So it's like in the 1960s, 1967, you're going to record the page number that you looked at, count up how many total students on that page, and split them up into their demographics. Then you'll find your clubs, count how many clubs you have, what types of clubs. And then that allows you to make a observation based off of that information that you've gathered. It made it a lot more tangible for the students to be able to wrap their heads around.
Yeah.
At first, I had some hemming and hawing because they were like, oh my God, I have to count all these every time.
Oh, man.
And so the first day was a little bit tedious, but after they did it once, it was really easy. And so on the initial day, we do our archival care to make sure that they know how to treat everything. We go through the demographics and examples, and then we go through the graphic organizer of what they're expected to fill out. Of, at the very top, circle the decade you're working on, write the specific year so that we know which one you're looking at if we need to go fact check you.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're filling out the demographics and then the school culture and making those observations. And then at the very end, they do a group analysis. Because the first day took a little while, because they were so excited and it was a little bit more tedious than they expected, we ended up extending it into the second day, and that's when they did their group analysis. So we would give them about 10 minutes to finish up whatever you were working on. And then we're going to have essentially just a group discussion because you all had different yearbooks from the same decade.
Mm-hmm.
And you are going to do a basic 3-2-1. I think it was like 3 things that you found interesting, 2 things that were different, and 3 things that were different, 2 things that are the same, and then 1 that you found interesting. So it allowed them to talk amongst themselves and discuss, which was really important because also in the original lesson, they did this 2-3 times so for each decade, they did a different graphic organizer. So at the end, they had like 5 papers of analysis spanning 5 decades of our history to be able to make their general observation. And in the initial one, I think they did a presentation, and I wasn't really involved in that part.
Mm-hmm.
This time, because we had made some changes, I said, well, a lot of this, they're not going to try to educate each other on these decades because we want them to be exposed to more of these decades than last time. So we ended up doing a Socratic seminar. So she had already had analysis questions that she had prepared initially. And I said, let's just take those same and let's prep them by doing this group analysis every time that they visit a new decade. And they're getting comfortable with their groups. And then also, hopefully, they will take what they've learned from their groups and also use it in the Socratic seminar and use it as also a way to invite each other, which was something that I had kind of towards the end. So we essentially repeated those steps for 2 days. They visited 3 to 4 different decades as groups. And normally we did assign them which decades. It was like if you started in the 60s, you're going up to the 90s just to have not utter chaos. And then, so that was like day 2 and day 3. And then on day 4, they finished up whatever their last one was, or if they needed to revisit a previous decade, and they got their analysis questions so that they could preview, go ahead and write their answers that they were going to turn into the teacher, but they were also going to be the security blanket for the kids that were not going to want to talk.
Yeah.
And then we went over kind of the expectations for the Socratic seminar that was on day 5. So we spent an entire week on this project, which I don't know if the teacher initially had planned. The first time we did it, I think it was only about 3 days. But we knew that we wanted to extend it to where they got more opportunities to see, because it's also really cool to see how one school has changed from the 60s until now. And it was really nice. And we just did an adapted Socratic seminar they had, because these students had not really participated in a Socratic seminar before. This was something I got when I was student teaching. You give them colored cards and you have 2 rounds. First round is red. The first time, if you speak, you put down your red card, and you are not allowed to speak again until all of the red cards are down. So it forces the other students to be able to talk before the next round. And it keeps some of our very excitable students from talking over others. So it gives it a little bit more of a tangible thing. So first one was red, second one was green. The teacher actually came up and got the cards from me about 2 months later to use with her other sets of classes when they did a Socratic seminar, because it went
That is a great way to do that. Yeah.
I don't remember where I got it from. It was either student teaching, or I had an internship before student teaching and saw somebody do it. And I was like, that's genius. I'm writing it down, locking it in there.
Yeah, seriously. I also love that they're getting the chance to write down their ideas about what they might want to say, which is absolutely important, I think, for any students going into a Socratic seminar. But I could see that even becoming a great way to sort of discuss. You might write something and feel like you've explained it well, but then when you start talking about it and you start getting that feedback from other people, maybe you start to realize, oh, maybe I didn't explain that as much as I thought, or oh, that's got me thinking about this other thing now. And I think it's really great, potentially a great opportunity to kind of talk about writing and revision and that whole process. Not that that's where you're trying to go, but my brain is just bouncing around with there's so many cool things in here to work with.
If I was working with them as an English teacher, that's definitely where we would have gone next. But it was also, we have quite a few ELLs, are English language learners at our school. So it was also kind of like, let's give everybody the chance to have it written out. And if they want to just read what is on their paper, no shame in that. And if they want to just have a conversation, that is okay too. The first couple, it was very much, I'm reading off my paper and I'm reading directly to the teacher and not having a conversation with the other people at the table. So we had to kind of walk them through that, but it was still a really great experience. And that group of kids that we did this with, I feel like has gone leaps and bounds since then, because I'm currently working with them on their capstone at the end of the semester of their individual research, and it's like night and day.
To see where they started and to see where they've been able to get now that they've had these experiences. That's always such a wonderful moment when you can see those moments of growth. Man.
And we don't get to see those as often in the library as you would think. I come in and I help with research, or I help with gathering those resources for them. And then my teachers often forget to like invite me back to see the final product. I've
Yeah.
only had a few that they were like, oh, they're going to be doing presentations. Are you free to come down and watch their presentations? I know that they would appreciate it. And I'm like, yes, of course I'll come.
That's awesome.
I'll make time.
And
So
you also mentioned how by writing it, you're helping your ELL students sort of get that preparation. And that's such a great point about being able to have that differentiation just built right in, because the kids who need more prep time can spend as much time as they need getting ready for their conversation. The kids that feel like they've got under control can probably just kind of knock through it real quick, but it sort of levels the playing field a little bit when you're going to have that Socratic seminar, as does having the colored cards, which are, again, brilliant. Definitely stealing that.
I can't take credit for it, but I'm happy to share it out.
It's so great. And that just shows there's so many great ways that when we can take that little bit of extra time and give the students that little bit of extra time, there's so many great ways that we can level things out and make it that much more accessible and engaging for all the students, which is great. Because I can imagine that the conversations they were having when they were generating them at their tables in their small groups, those must have been really interesting to listen in on, because I'm sure that each student is going to, because they're looking at different yearbooks, they're going to maybe notice different things. But then when they start talking through similarities and differences, I can just imagine different pieces of information going back and forth and the conclusions that they're trying to draw and the analysis. I mean, I really want to be a fly on the wall when they're doing that.
It was a really cool thing to watch. And you could also tell the difference between the first time that we did it and their conversations, which were still great conversations. But when they're talking to their groups, they're like, the layouts are similar. I'm like, well, guys, it's a yearbook. They do like work on a similar structure. Like that's kind of required. Not saying that's not a great observation, but like, let's dig a little bit deeper than that. But like at our school, it's changed significantly over time. It was just a very zoned, affluent school in the 60s to probably the 80s or 90s. And then it became a magnet school, and we are specifically a world languages magnet. So we attract a lot of refugee students and students that are coming from different countries. And so you saw a major shift in the demographics of the school and the things that were being offered at the school at certain points. And it was really cool to have those conversations with kids of like, why is there only white people in this yearbook? Like, that's not what it looks like right now.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, yeah, this is from 1959. Let's have a little think about why that might be here in Texas.
And I mean, potentially, there's another great spin-off lesson too of maybe let's look at some census data. Let's see what the government has to say about what was Texas's general statistics like in this time versus later on. And the way you've set up this student work page with the very specific like decade, example year, and page numbers, and then having them total the numbers, I think is such it seems maybe basic, but it's so important to have them doing that, like starting with that really basic level of analysis of let's just get a number, because that, like you said, it makes it so concrete and helps them to, once they've done it, apply that in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different parsing that they can do of those numbers and kind of thinking about where they lead your thoughts and what they tell you about the school.
Yeah. I will say that that's one thing as a librarian that I never thought that would happen. I am not a numbers person, or I never thought I was a numbers person until I became a librarian. And it's like looking at circulation data and my collection development and all of that stuff. I'm like, give me some numbers and graphs. Yeah. I will eat that up. So when like we were trying to figure out how to make this better, I was like, well, maybe I'll just have them do what I would do if I were trying to essentially evaluate my program and things like that. But I was like, I'm going to look at the numbers first before I make any decisions or observations, because those numbers are going to tell me something. I don't know what, but they'll tell me something.
Yeah.
And it like really made it, I think, a lot more tangible and easier for them. And we were able to talk to them about sample data, and that, just counting one page of the 9th grade and letting it represent the whole. And that being, taking a sample of 500 students, you're looking at 35. I'm not asking you to count all 500 students and break that up. I did have one group that tried to do that. And I was like, I appreciate the effort. Let's calm down. And then, also anecdotal evidence where you're like, now based off of what I've seen, what I've heard, what I've realized, I can make observations and inferences off of that, which is something that I feel like students don't get enough time and practice to do.
Yeah. And that's another great cross-disciplinary possibility too, is let's talk to the math teachers about statistics. Let's talk to the math teachers about, maybe we graph some of these numbers to see, like, what do we notice about the trends over time? Like, that's one of the things I love about talking through lessons, because there's so many great ways you can branch them out and look at so many cool things. So this was the second time you've done this lesson, the most recent semester?
Yes, that was the second time this year. So on the PowerPoint that I have uploaded the slides, I kind of have an introduction of like how everything started, what it looked like the first semester, and kind of the problems that we saw, and then what it looked like the second semester, before I kind of showed the instructions and stuff, just to like walk through the progression of how it came to be. And, somewhat pacing. We only have 45 minutes, 50-minute classes. So if you had a longer class period, a block schedule, you could easily do double the amount that we were able to do and have much deeper discussions. I honestly think we could have done this for 2-3 weeks and still like not even gotten past the surface level. But it was a great introduction. And I also think forcing them to do this was at the maybe 3 weeks into their semester for this semester long course, that it kind of allowed them that practice, because I'm thinking specifically about the EL students that are in that class that you could not get them to talk to you at the beginning of the semester. I had one that had been coming into the library all year with her brother, but very meek, does not really want to speak all that much. She had specifically asked for a little bit of extra time with the yearbooks. And so I told her, I was like, hey, come in. We have these study rooms. I will set up the yearbooks in the study rooms for you to look at. Just let me know which ones. Because our makerspace becomes like an area that kids eat in during lunch. And I was like, no yearbooks where there are people eating. And now she will actively seek me out and have conversations about what they are doing in sociology and what she's thinking for her project, and have full-on conversations with me. And same with some of the other students that flat out refused to do this Socratic seminar. We did not have 100% participation in the Socratic seminar, even with us being like, this is 20% of the total grade. So no matter what, if you did everything, you will get an 80. But we want you, no one here is judging you. We want you to just read what is on your paper, have a conversation with us. This is the sort of thing that we're going to continue doing the rest of the semester. And there was definitely a few that did not want to speak. And that was their right. And I think their teacher also gave them some extra accommodations after the fact. But those same students you can actively have conversations in their classroom with their peers and their teacher by this point in the school year, which I would love to think that it would still be happening despite this lesson or not. But I definitely think that it has contributed to their ability to communicate with each other.
Yeah. And I mean, the fact that the students are coming back to you to discuss other issues, class related issues about this, or asking you for that extra assistance, like that's clearly a mark of this lesson being pretty effective for those students, that they are feeling that level of comfort and that level of understanding from you in having, help them put this lesson together. So that's really wonderful.
Well, I am not going to take 100% credit. I am very lucky that the new sociology teacher that came in this year we worked really only once during the first semester. And then when she came in wanting to do the yearbook thing again, and I was like, can we adapt this? Let me just I'm going to make everything. I'm going to show it to you. And if you tell me that it's not what you want, that's okay. I'm not going to cry about it. But this is a way that I think it could be improved. And then throughout that week that she was in, she was like, oh, well, I also need help with this unit and this unit. And she ended up sending me, I helped create a research website for a specific unit that they were working on, that she was like, we really struggled with this one. And we are currently working on the capstone that we 100% built together of she told me the issues that were going on last semester that she saw. And I was like, okay, I can address that. And then we can also put some vocabulary to it. They now know what a lit review is because they had to do a lit review, and they're doing survey methodology right now.
Wow.
So do they think it's that cool? Probably not. But I find it fascinating. And absolutely. I also think they're asking really cool questions. So I'm like, y'all are at the end of this going to do so much better than we even expected because of us being able to work together and collaborate on it. So we've been very
That's
lucky.
wonderful. Yeah. What a great relationship. Nice. Woo, go Miss DuPont. That's awesome, man. Well, this lesson is really something. Is there anything so you've already kind of done a little bit of revision from semester 1 to semester 2. Are there any changes you see coming up for future times if this gets redone? Are there any things that kind of stand out as maybe there was one place here we might smooth it, or did it feel like you kind of got pretty close to locked in this time around?
I think there's still a few things that probably need to be clarified or changed, even with the instruction sheet that had pretty explicit instructions on it, with examples. Some of the more not quantifiable options, like the activities and academics, typically was harder for the students, just truly because they were like, well, what do you mean about activities? And I was like, I gave you examples of the Sadie Hawkins dance. We don't do that anymore. Have you heard of that? But because it's a little bit less harder to define for both of those, they struggled with being I don't really know what you want. So those I feel like could probably still use some tweaking, or maybe find a different way to approach those two kind of topics. But still, overall, the project was really great. And I think, again, we could probably do 2-3 weeks worth of stuff. The ideas of graphing it all out would be so cool. But I don't know if they have time nor want to do that.
Well, and that's something that maybe down the road is explored or not, whatever. But the ability to have somebody like that you can collaborate with on this kind of a thing, and that they're open to, look, we tried this, it didn't quite work. Let's try and figure out a different way to go about that. I feel like not all teachers are willing to go in that direction. So it's really wonderful that you've got a partner that's ready to kind of go with you on that and see where things go.
And I also feel like because she has been so open, it has definitely made me more proactive in any revisions that I feel like may need to happen. So probably before, I feel like this year has been absolutely amazing for me curriculum wise. I felt very secure in my programming and my collection development and like getting the kids excited about getting into the library. But like this year, I feel like I have done lessons that I never thought I would have ever been able to do. And because of people like Miss DuPont, I've been able to be like, okay, I have a little bit more of my teacher confidence and swagger back.
Nice.
I have had enough of people being like, but you're a teacher? Yes, I taught for 5 years before I did this job, and I still teach all of the time. That I've gotten like pushed myself a little bit more to be like, okay, you came to me with this very basic idea for MLA citations. How about we like make this more interesting?
Put some sparkles and some flames on the side of this.
Yeah. I'm like, instead of just doing this, how about we do this? And because of the fact that I had other people believe in me and be like, this was absolutely great, I want to do something like this again. It's definitely pushed me to be like, okay, if I want to make this sparkly and better, I'm not going to ask their permission. I'm just going to go ahead and do it and then present it to them. Look, I have all of the things made for you for this lesson. So do you want to do it, or do you want me to go back to that other thing that you wanted me to do that, I mean, we both know is kind of lame. Like, you didn't want to do it, so you wanted me to do it, because that's sometimes what happens.
Unfortunately.
You're like, I don't want to teach MLA citations, but I want them to know it correctly. So I need you to come do that boring stuff so that they think that you're boring, not me. And I'm like, that's not fair. I'm not boring.
That's awesome, though. Like, and I think you're absolutely right. When we can take those opportunities to be like, okay, you brought me this. Let me bring you, instead of giving you this McDonald's cheeseburger, this McDonald's burger with no cheese on it, let me bring you the beautiful burger that's got 4 patties and cheese and bacon, and like, I'll give you the whole platter instead of just this one little thing. That's really I think that's always the way to go. Like, bring the solution rather than saying, well, this isn't so great. Show up with a solution in hand, and it's really hard for people to back away from that.
Yeah.
Well, I know people are going to want to do this lesson. I want to do this lesson. Are there any things that people should maybe have in mind the first time they go to execute this?
I would say the example sheet with the explicit instructions was very helpful to the students. We gave it to them the first day and made sure that they left them on the tables. And then we told them the second day, we were like, you can take it or not. And probably 90% of them did, just to have that little reference sheet. It was also really helpful to have the amount of yearbooks that we were able to have, and have it
that's quite a resource
in a space that was kind of dedicated to it. We did have to pick them all up and then put them all back out because lunch was in the middle in between the 2 classes that were doing it, which was kind of a pain. I wish we wouldn't have had to do that, but yeah, it is what it is. And I think the other thing that we had quite a few conversations on was like the demographics portion of, I mean, I'm in the high school level. So the high schoolers were like, but we don't judge people by the way that they look. I don't know them. And I'm like, I understand that. I said, but what we're doing right now is we're taking data of what we can observe.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, right now we are going to take the numbers based on what we can see. We can also look at last names to help inform us. We can also look at other stuff. I said, but they're not here. You're not going to go tell them to their face that you think that they are something that they are not. We are just, making our best observation of the information that we have at hand.
Mm-hmm.
And, as soon as we learn more information, we can change that as well.
Mm-hmm.
You're allowed to change your hypothesis. You're allowed to change your mind as you gather more information. And so that was a nice little learning moment with them, especially with the kids that were like, but, isn't that racist? And I was, no, but I can understand why you might think that.
Mm-hmm.
And let's just, go with what we can see and what we can observe and know that we're not always going to be 100% correct.
Mm-hmm.
We are going to say that whatever we observe in this yearbook is probably still only going to be 60% correct. We are making our best guess because they're not the ones standing here in front of us being able to give us firsthand information. And that's what sociologists have to do.
Yeah. And I mean, not for nothing, it's kind of awesome that they're saying we shouldn't be judging people based on their appearance and like that is their default state now. That's not a bad thing in my book, but I can see why that would be a struggle. So this lesson is awesome. We are now going to take a 90-degree turn and we're going to head into our book break.
Book break.
Squiddity! So any kind of books you want to share, and I think you might have more than one, which is awesome. I love getting great titles out there. So what do you think people should be putting their eyes on in terms of some books that you have enjoyed?
Well, all of mine are going to be pretty much exclusively YA because I never grew up and I never got out of YA and no one can tell me otherwise.
Nothing wrong with that.
But right now, one of my absolute favorites is Ace of Spades by Faridah, Àbíké, and I cannot say the last name.
I want to say Íyímídé. I'm not positive on that, though. I might have just butchered that.
It is Íyímídé.
I might have butchered that.
Faridah, Àbíké-Íyímídé.
It is. Yeah. Ace of Spades is really a great book. What was your favorite bit?
Honestly, I don't think I have any favorite parts. I have the parts that disgust me, and that is why I love it so much.
Yes.
And that it seems like a really contradictory statement, but I love a good thriller. I'm a mood reader all the way. I am either reading a thriller or I'm reading a romance. There's like nothing really in between most of the time. And Ace of Spades, it follows these two African-American protagonists. It's dual perspective in this very elite boarding school. And, things are just not right. Things are going down. They're being targeted, but they don't know why. And because you've already read it, I'm just going to say vague statements so that I'm not giving spoilers. But the music teacher, that scene, I remember reading it and I read it and I closed the book and my library clerk was next to me and she was reading pretty much anything I gave to her. And I was like, you're going to read this next. She already knew that it was going to her soon because she also loved thrillers. And I closed it really forcefully. And I was like, that better not have just happened when I open this book back up. I was like, I'm going to be so mad if that is really what happened, because it's something that you see all the time, especially in high school. And I was like, this is the thing that I'm always afraid of happening with our students. of them slipping through the cracks or someone intentionally letting them slip through the cracks. And I feel like mostly an optimist, that I want to believe the best in people. And I shut that book and I was like, that better not have happened. And then when I opened it, I reread that same chapter and I was like, I am so mad. And then this past year, we have a Name That Book competition, and it was one of our books. And so I had pitched to my administration that we needed to do a like faculty almost book club with it, that if they read one of the Name That Book books and like did a survey, then they could get some PD credit so that they then could promote those books as well. And
that's great.
It was mainly because of this book, because I was like, I think every person in education needs to read this book. Because if you don't think you need to read this book, you are the person who needs to read the book.
Yeah. Even though in the book, there's things that are going on that are sinister, like purposefully sinister.
Oh, yeah.
There's parts that are unfortunately sort of commonplace in parts of education.
Yeah. And it's like, there were things that are happening that ended up being sinister, but everything up to that point, you were like, okay, this is pretty commonplace. This is like something that teenagers do and teachers do. You let the kid come in when they're having a bad day and, you know, they're having an issue with their other teacher. And I, as a librarian, have always been like, if you're coming to me as a safe space, I love that. I want that for you. But I need a note from your teacher saying that they know where you are and that they have gotten your attendance. And I was like, because one, legal issue, your mama come up to school and they don't know where you are, that is a big problem. And I am not here to upset anybody's mamas. And two, like, your butt has to be in the seat to be able to get credit. And I'm not going to allow myself or to be anything that's going to get in the way of that. And all of those issues tied into what seemingly is just a thriller book that most people would be like, yeah, I read it for the plot. I read it for the twists and turns. That I was like, deep to my core, I was like, every educator needs to read this book. At least every high school educator needs to read this book, because these are seemingly innocent things that can turn bad so quickly.
Yeah, very much.
The other two books that I brought are both very light and fuzzy and like warm and fuzzy. And both of those are this year's TASHOS winners. Like on our TASHOS, which if I'm sure you know, but the listeners might not. TASHOS is the TLA Young Adult Teens book list. And the two that I absolutely love so far this year, I haven't made it through the entire list because there's like 60 of them on the list. But I started, and this might be offered by Karen McDowell. Oh my God, it's so cute. It's one of those light, fuzzy, like warm romance novels that it reminds you of while you were sleeping. And I'll just say that there are some plot points that are definitely inspired by While You Were Sleeping. I don't think any teenager would know what While You Were Sleeping is. So I have to like figure out a different way to pitch it to them. But she also deals with social anxiety and the main character. And the entire time is trying to figure out a way to communicate with her dad about needing to go to therapy for social anxiety, all while there is, you know, mistaken identity and a romance and all of the other stuff. And it's just one of those, like, similar to almost a Hallmark movie where you're just like, I kind of know this and it feels so familiar and it feels so wonderful while reading it. I will only ever have positive vibes. And the Exactly Where You Need to Be by Amelia Coombs, I feel like is a mixture between the two. It is kind of a romance, but it is by the perspective of a girl with OCD who is not going to college at this moment. She and her best friend, who is about to go off to college, decide to go on a road trip to go see their favorite podcasters. And it's one of the true crime podcasters. So they're like very into the macabre and very into the gore. And it's kind of like a lovely, there's both romance in it and deeply entrenched in like friendship as well as, which I feel like right now is a very hard find. There's a lot of romance, and fantasy and thrillers, but there's not like anything right now. I mean, not anything, but there aren't very many that are focusing on friendships and where it's like the main arc is about her and her best friend. Is there also a romance with the best friend's older brother? Maybe. But like it's like that's kind of the side event going on, and also about her coming of age and like realizing that her disability, her OCD, is not in fact holding her back as much as she thought it was. It's in fact her overprotective mom that's also struggling with, letting your kid out of the nest because they're about to go off to college. And it was just another, like, it both is feel good and, did I cry? Maybe not. I don't remember. And I'm not going to say, but it's one that you just feel good when you're done with it. And I read a lot, and I read a lot of books, and those are always going to be the ones that I will always remember. Will it take me maybe 10 seconds when I'm trying to pitch it to a kid to remember the exact plot because it's similar to others? But I'm like, I may not be able to tell you anything about this specific book, but I can tell you vibes right now, and this is the right vibe for what you're looking for right now.
Nice.
And both of those were absolutely wonderful.
All right. I definitely got 2 new titles on my list, that's for sure. I'm sure you know Jeff Zentner, but he also has been writing some real great YA friendship sort of focused stories. So I always talk about Rain and Delilah's Midnight Matinee.
Panel last year. He was on one of the panels at TLA, and I was like, oh, I love you.
Yeah, he's awesome. Well, thank you so much. Not only have you given us a great lesson, you've given us some awesome titles to add to our lists, and I am just so thankful that you were able to be here. I'm so thankful we connected at TLA, and hopefully this will not be our last time chatting about some fun lessons. So thank you.
I was listening to your one on creating the custom Google search the other day, and I was like, how will I bring this to my teachers today? I'm going to find a way. I haven't found the in yet, but I'm going to.
Nice. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks for checking out this episode of the SLLN podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes, which include not only a link to the lesson, but also links to the SLLN website, home to a curated list of free upcoming virtual events and resources for school librarians. It's easy to become a member of the network. Just visit the site and use what you like. If you have an idea, a question, or a lesson you want to share, you can email schoolliblearning@gmail.com. That's school, L-I-B, learning@gmail.com. Know someone with a great school library lesson? Let us know. Until next time, be safe, be good, and be well.